to reflect on what the Iran deal means for global markets, energy prices, as well as economic stability. We're joined this evening by Dr Mikatekiso Kubayi, Senior Researcher and South African Research Chair on African Diplomacy and Foreign Policy at the University of Johannesburg. A very good evening to you, Doctor. Good to have you with us on African Business. Welcome.
Good evening, my sister. Thank you so much for inviting me.
So here we are once again at the brink of a deal. It was touch and go at some point, but it looks like it is all systems go at this point.
Yeah.
How much do you know about the details of this deal?
Well, there's very little, in terms of what is what the final draft document actually articulates, except little snippets keep coming out. That include sanctions relief. I see just now that Deputy Vice President J.D. Vance has confirmed that the sanctions relief for Iran. There's a cessation of military activity, but even that has got to be explained exactly what it means. I mean, we know that, for instance, Iran has been having a difficult time with the presence of American bases in the region. And those are the bases that essentially launched attacks on Iran. And so on. It also includes Lebanon, cessation of attacks on Lebanon. But there's also then the resistance from the Netanyahu administration to live up to the commitment of this new deal. And so on. So there's still much, to come out in by way of the final text. I suppose the final text will be published, once the signing has been concluded in Geneva. And the Pakistani Prime Minister is about to announce, the details of the signing and so on, just now to the assembly. So
we are
it will be
looking forward
interesting to see that.
No, certainly. Yeah. Now, one of the key reported elements do include a 60-day negotiation period
Yes.
that will address Iran's nuclear program, the sanctions, the relief of the sanctions, which you've just mentioned, as well as a number of other unresolved issues. What have been the indications from Iran's side regarding this nuclear program? Because that has also been one of the key issues where the US, Israel and Iran have not been able to find common ground.
Yeah, well, there are a couple of issues, both principle and just practicalities. The first, there's a sovereignty issue, right? Now you have Iran that has been saying consistently for decades that, look, we have every right to explore the generation of electricity, the generation of power, by using nuclear technology. Right? That is not the same as manufacturing nuclear weapons, right? And it has been consistent on this for a very long time, and in fact even going as far as saying, but even by faith, right? Their faith, they are not even allowed to produce and hold such. So that is not their intention to do that, but nonetheless, they've been, facing, all of these sanctions and actions, under the argument, that they seek to acquire nuclear weapons and so on and so forth. So it's a major issue. There's a sovereignty issue, to say that we're a independent sovereign state. We can make decisions for ourselves, and we have every right to pursue technology in this particular area for our own development, to power our industries, and so on and so forth. Right. That's the first one. Then there's also this, counter, of course, to say that, but you are literally very close to weapons grade enrichment of uranium, and once you get to those parts, you start to make everyone nervous, because then by the manufacturing of weapons, nuclear weapons, then becomes fairly straightforward from that point on. And therefore it's a bone of contention. It's an issue. It's a threat, in the region, etc.,
Right.
etc. That's, the counter argument, to that. So it then goes back and forth, to say that, but what then is to be done? Because on the one hand, you can't expect a country to say that, look, we can't secure energy, right? Because somebody's afraid that we're about to bomb them or something of that nature, and so on. Then there are also arguments, but hang on, you've got Israel that also has nuclear weapons. They do not say it outright out front, but it's like a hidden, what is it, an open secret, if you like, that there are nuclear weapons there, and the United States is the only one that is known to have ever bombed anyone with atomic weapons,
You're right.
and so on. So so there are all of these arguments going back and forth about but what then is to be done. But at the end of the day, it's about securing a a security architecture that everybody in that region can be comfortable with,
So let's look.
and
Yeah.
that also guarantees development for Iran as well.
Right. Let's look then for a moment at the economic impact of this prospective US Iran agreement. What type of economic impact is it likely to have?
Huge. I mean, immediately. I mean, if the moment you say, we're, offering or willing to offer, significant sanctions relief, that means, a lot of, revenue flowing into, into Iran. Iran would be able to suddenly have, in the cash that it requires, that it needs to develop the country, build infrastructure, improve education, improve, investment in research and development, and so on and so forth. And but Iran is actually quite technologically savvy as well, by the way. There's actually quite some significant capacity there, so it could potentially accelerate the economic development of Iran, quite rapidly. And so on, and even essentially maybe even secure Iran as a dominant player in the region, economically.
Right. And the Strait of Hormuz, that's also expected to reopen. How is that going to impact the global oil prices? And, how have the international markets reacted to that?
So far, there's a drop in the price of oil, a sharp drop, which is actually quite interesting, and quite welcomed by, I think, everybody. The whole world, has been struggling, with sharp rises in, the oil price because it's inflationary. It impacts on decisions on interest rates. It makes life very difficult, for ordinary consumers, this fuel, this resource, to commute back and forth, to work and back and so on. So the whole world, is essentially welcoming this development of a reduction, of oil prices because of the impact that it will have on their economies and so on. So the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, could then, maybe add, impetus, to and secure, the sustained reduction, in those, oil prices, perhaps maybe even to return to where they were before.
Right. I'd like us
I
to
doubt it. I
probably.
doubt it because they have a tendency to not, quite, return to normal, to where they exactly were before. But I mean, the world is, has a reason to be hopeful. That we could at least maybe get back to pre-conflict prices. And so on, and maybe with the entry of sanction free Iranian oil and gas products, maybe we might then see an increase in supply of the product in the market, and that could then maybe have a further downward pressure on the price of the resource. So maybe that would definitely be good for the global economy. It would certainly be good for us here, to be able to even access or Iranian oil. And at some point, South Africa and Iran had an arrangement, for the supply of oil at reasonable prices and so on and so forth. So
Right.
there are many opportunities, many significant implications.
I'd like us to focus as well on the G7 summit that's currently taking place in France. from the 15th, which is today, until the 17th. Talk to us about the importance of the summit given the current global economic environment, and perhaps also just deliberate on whether or not this US-Iran agreement is overshadowing the summit.
I think it is, to some respects, because it's the major single biggest, issue concerning everybody in the world right now. But remember that the G7, is a handful of countries, right? It's 7 countries, essentially, or 7, represented, states, if you like. Because it includes the EU. But it's just that, 7. That's what the group of 7. That's what it is. So there's you still have the rest of the globe, that is concerned about, a whole host of other things, including security and so on. Both economic security and human security broadly, and so on. So I think the rest of the world can be forgiven, for having their priorities, a bit elsewhere. And less focus, on the G7, at least at this point.
I mean, there are other leaders invited over and above the G7. There's India,
Yeah.
Narendra Modi is going to be there. Brazil's going to be there. William Ruto from Kenya. South Korea's Lee Jae-myung is going to be there. So let's look at some of the key economic issues that the leaders are expected to be focusing on at this year's G7.
Well, there's a lot, that needs to go into consideration, by the G7. You've got, the issue is, at least, I would expect, coming from, President Ruto. We've just had, a G7 in Africa where, issues of debt, issues of the cost of borrowing, issues of climate finance, issues of liquidity, in developing economies and so on. Those are issues that one would expect to be introduced, to be put on the agenda by President Ruto, coming out of the African continent, and so on. And of course, this issue of oil prices, is then suddenly going to make life a little bit more bearable, for discussions, or in discussions, the G7, because prior to that, they would have to deal with, the issue of the Strait of Hormuz, because it's impacting directly, on the economic fortunes, of the world over, and so on. So these are, some of the big issues. So there's likely to be, a lot of easing, of a little pressure on this point. But they may also want to be discussing, for instance, because part of the arrangement with Iran, is, the development of Iran, the reintegration of Iran, into, the global economy. It also means, Iran accessing value chains, in the energy market. And so on. So there will be, certainly quite a bit, in that space, to be discussed. You know that, the United States holds the presidency of the G20. And the United States is, you've had the President Trump, let the oil, flow, and so on and so forth, drill, baby, drill, and so on. So there may be, and whereas Europe, on the other hand, is pushing, but, quite heavily on climate action and so on and so forth. So there will be, significant discussions along those issues, along those lines.
Right.
And lastly, I think, you may, have quite a bit of discussion as well on issues of tariffs.
All right.
Because they're still actually hanging over everybody's heads.
Mikatekiso Kubayi, Dr. Kubayi, thank you so much for your insight and your time this evening as we focus on two, major developments currently underway, really impacting not only the African continent, but impacting the global economic and political stability. That's Dr. Mikatekiso Kubayi, senior researcher and foreign policy at University of Johannesburg.